to talk a bit about the outside world. The diets are made out of products which can be bought in local stores and markets, and that depends on the broader issues of economy, ecology, and geography of the country, in this case, Russia. And I used to work for a large American company, so I know that presentations like that have to be started with disclaimer. So these are my views, not views of Skolkovo I work for, and not views of Russian government. So you probably had a chance to walk outside and see Moscow. It's a large metropolis, to some extent more convenient than Chicago, Los Angeles, or London, cities that I know. But if you go not far away from Moscow, you see something like that. So that's how the countryside looks in Arkhangelsk region or Vologda region or Yaroslavl region or many other places in Russia. Broken villages, empty villages, one or two households out of 200 or 300. And that happened mostly over the last 20-25 years, not even in Soviet time. So Russia is actually the only country, as far as I know, with decreasing acreage of farmland. It doesn't really happen anywhere else. The land, is always a pressure, but here, it's still extensive. So even worse is when you look at where the food comes from. So I believe if sanctions would be real imposed 2 years ago, the Western world could just cut off the seeds and embryos and eggs which are supplied to Russia, because most of what we eat actually is coming from seed that developed states, Western Europe, and some other places, really greatly dependent on genetics. So if you talk about other issues, still many problems. There is a problem with monitoring of yield and efficiency of crops, diseases, and just land in general. Also food storage and delivery. It's probably to a large extent 20 years old, the whole system. Of course, there are holdings, some agro-holdings like AGRA, Cherkizova, and they're pretty much up to date, but most of the country is still lag behind. So if you're talking about global trends, the food is in deficit and going to be so 20 years from now. Population of the world grows fast, and people want to eat live a more affluent life. They want to eat better, and that's not sustainable with the current trend in yield increase. Supposed to be about 2% for major crops, and yield increase is actually about 1.2%. So even with GMO and modern technologies, the yield increase and selection has to become more intensive. So genetic technologies, they became predominant in selection over the last probably 10-15 years. I just been in the conference in San Diego on plant and animal genome. So there I learned that in major companies like Monsanto or DuPont, genome editing is used widely, and there are up to 5 or 6 different traits changed in just one generation, very intensively. So what's going on in Russia? I'm sorry, a couple more slides about genetic engineering. So it's believed that genome technology and genetic technologies are way to go, and of course, that in most of the world, like in States, in Brazil, in Australia, genetically modified organisms prevail now. And of course, champion here is Monsanto, and soon after Monsanto, probably number 2 now is Syngenta, which is becoming a Chinese company to some extent now. So what's going on in Russia? Very different picture. Most Russians don't believe in GMO, and this is a poll from about 2 years ago. 82% of Russians believe that genetically modified food actually kills and hurts. And people simply don't understand what they're talking about. Actually, most of the people don't really believe that there are genes in our foods. And unfortunately, the case even with experts. Recently, we had an expertise by a professor of agriculture in our expert council, which looked for our grant proposals for startups. And he had some genetic startup. And he just refused it, saying that genetics is prohibited by Russian law. To some extent, he's right. Actually, we had pretty dramatic changes in our laws about genetically modified organisms. So these are from last year suggestions to change the 10 years and 15 years laws. So essentially, these two editions would completely forbidden sale and growth of genetically modified organisms, and actually it's understand broader, any organisms which are grown and selected using genetic technologies. So it's pretty bad. And in the same time, if you look at other laws that we have, a lot of things are allowed. So Russia, for instance, is an absolutely world champion on intensity of poultry. So chicken can grow up to might blogging 53 kilos per square meter in large factories. And pretty much all the antibiotics are allowed still in food, which is prohibited in the States and prohibited in Western Europe and even to some extent in China. And also there are huge problems with chicken waste. So that's on the background of decreasing economy. So if you look at GDP numbers, you can see that Russia is in recession. And I remember recession in 2008 in California, the worst in 70 years in the USA. And that was ugly. You know, people used to live under the bridges. I've seen that myself. So now the numbers in Russia is even worse. Of course, you know, we are not like Americans, we can survive. But still it's bad. So Russian ruble is down and the oil is not going to save us anymore. So what to do? Well, Russians are pretty inventive and we survived through many crises. So there are government committees, there are research institutes, there are innovation funds, and actually the rest of my talk will be way more positive than the first one. So the first thing Russians do, they go swimming, and in 1 month there will be a big event called Foresight Fleet 2016. 4 big ships will be actually coming from Samara to Astrakhan on Volga River, and about 500 experts going to discuss what to do next in terms of major industries, how to make them more intensive and efficient. So this incentive calls nets. So we have AutoNet, we have NeuroNet, we have HealthNet, we have FoodNet, and many other ones. So if you look at FoodNet, that's what we are talking about today. It's several markets which are supposed to explode over the next 15 or 20 years with the capitalization of this market of about $5 billion in 2035. And you can see that personalized nutrition is #1 on this list. So the field is going to grow at about 20% annual increase in the country. So how to get there? Well, there are several things that we're supposed to do. There are market moves, there are technology moves, and there are support events. So it's changes in legislature, building infrastructure, and doing other very tangible things. And I would like to point out on the left column, so these are mostly private companies which used to work, not just talk. And probably the most interesting of them is called Elementary. It's a Russian company, a startup, very successful one, and they sell and develop beautiful products like that. So it's prepacked goods of restaurant quality, so you can buy these foods and you can make your own dinner. And hopefully we'll have many more companies like that coming soon. So now I would like to switch gears and talk a little bit about Skolkovo, which is an organization where I worked for the last 2 years. So Skolkovo was founded in about 2010, and it's the largest innovation fund in Russia. Right now it's under construction. It's just outside Moscow, and they built at the same time, they're building a university called Skoltech, also a big technopark, the largest in Europe. There are also some lab buildings, office buildings, and places for people to live. So it's actually a little city which is going to count maybe 35,000 people in 3 years. So Skolkovo is also an ecosystem. It's designed to diversify Russian economy, to give a boost to new technologies in 5 areas: space, nuclear, and also IT, of course, and biomedicine. So if you're talking about the number of companies, it's staggering, about 1,500 new startups. Development is very fast. So we had a double number of applications for startups in Skolkovo for residency over the last year, 2015. Also, the number of workers in these companies doubled over the last year, as well as revenue. So actually, it's a big success. If you're talking about biomedicine cluster where I work, it's to a large extent about medicine, new pharmaceuticals, new devices. But over the last year, 2015, we saw a huge growth in agriculture. Actually, that's the largest and fastest growing strategic division in Skolkovo these days. It started about 1 year ago with the decision of our council, our scientific council. The council is what directs Skolkovo on science side and technology side, and it's built out of best academicians we have and a couple of Nobel laureates. So we developed some new directions broadly in agriculture, which were defended last year at this council. And we decided not to limit ourselves on any specific area, like plants, for instance, but go broadly around pretty much all areas and let startups to decide where they want to be. So we have several trends in plant agriculture. First of all, it's genetic and selection, of course. Soil development, new fertilizers, precision farming, and so on. Also, livestock and aquaculture, especially in our areas where Russia lags behind. We don't really have many breeds in pork, poultry, as we talked about, and most of other directions. So we need to catch up. Then industrial microbiology and biotechnology, and specifically food treatment and deep processing of agricultural products and waste as well. And of course forestry, because 80% of the country is still in forests. So we saw really explosive growth in the number of startups and companies which want to be residents. The direction and actually acceptance of this application started just 6 months ago, and we have more than 100 of them. 15 companies became resident, and they would be all over the place. So we have companies on plant genetics, companies in animal industrial microbiology, and even 2 forestry companies developing biomarkers for forests. We do a lot of events and contests. So in the end of 2015, in December, we had a broad contest on business plans, and had about 100 companies coming. And I would show just a couple of companies which became champions, and now Skolkovo residents applying for grants. So one of them called Agrobiotech 2020, it's founded by a Russian-born professor of agriculture. He lives in Austria, Vienna, but he actually has two startups here in Moscow. So the first one is going to work on double hybrids and selection of sugar beets, one of the most important export culture in Russian agriculture. Another company actually grows algae, microalgae to be exact, and you probably know in stores in Europe and States these big green supplements. They cost sometimes $30–50, and mostly they made of microalgae. That's exactly what they're doing, and they really want to also use this algae to feed livestock and especially aquaculture. So that's one of the things which never been done before, at least in Russia, and it's very scientific company. And another company which recently became a resident, it's actually going to be big-scale production of fructose and inulin, pharmaceutical and AGRA food processing products, enzymes, started from topinambour, which is a relatively new culture but quite popular in Russia right now. And that's probably my favorite. You know, Skolkovo has several local offices, one of them in Vladivostok, which I traveled this summer. And there is a company which actually grows trepang. Trepang is one of the most valuable aqua products. It's a little organism living in the ocean naturally, which costs probably at the rate of red caviar. So in Chinese medicine, it's one of most important products with about 300 active ingredients in it. So it turns out that it grows slowly, just like one trepang out of 10 makes it to maturity, and nobody ever cared about its genetic and selection. And that's exactly what this company is going to do on their base in Nakhodka on Japanese Sea. Precise Farming Conference, that was another hit. Actually just 2 weeks ago we had a conference in Hypercube in Skolkovo, and there were more than 250 people coming, so we need to have additional rows of seats. And we had about 40 presenters, each 5 minutes, because lack of time. Huge interest from investors and also from our larger industries. And this is for farm school. Sorry, it's in Russian, but we're going to have a week-long course on modern agriculture for Russians and BRIC countries coming up in July. And a couple of more slides on what Skolkovo does outside of startups and what else going on. There is, well, at least a proposal now to have a large genetic center for genetic selection actually built in Skolkovo, where we're going to collaborate with Skoltech, our new university. And the purpose of this center is exactly on what we lack the most, which would be seeds and embryos of plants and animals. So I'm going to, first of all, genotype population of Russian crops and animals, and then come up with faster ways to select them. And well, it's a sister university called Skoltech, and they're going to have a large new product program and direction in agriculture. So that's all I wanted to say. So the future is actually brighter than our past and what we have now. Thank you very much.
По поводу ген-модифицированных продуктов.
About this horror in Russia about modified products, genetically modified products. Actually, if you talk about old women, it's one thing, but there were many positive experiments, and the scientific community is aware that there is nothing wrong with gene modification. And we shouldn't talk about it together. Of course, all those villages and bear skins that you showed us on your slides, but actually we have some areas of agriculture where we are quite well off, and you seem not to be aware, and we send some agricultural products abroad, so we shouldn't really say that we are this slide of yours with this destroyed village was out of place. Probably it's not comme il faut, but I made this photograph myself, and it's absolutely true view. Also, there was a letter we got 3 years ago from Russian scientists. About 200 signatures were in this letter, and they also said that genetically modified products are not dangerous, but in 3 years, we had only tiny corrections to our law, which are only going to be regarded. It's another question. I actually want to support previous speaker we of course want genetically modified products to be approved. We know that it's safe, and we know that it's anti-scientific to oppose them, and I actually was one of the people who signed this letter about genetically modified products, and it's very strange that actually our minister is a scientist himself, a scholar, and he should understand that there is nothing wrong with genetically modified products, but still somehow it's still really not allowed legally. Do you know about anything organization that could really coordinate the efforts to change this situation, to explaining maybe to general population the scientific position concerning genetically modified products?
I quite agree with you. This is necessary to do. And we at Skolkovo are trying to participate in various events. That won't be fast, because this is a difficult thing, this is a difficult decision. And I think the polls show that most people are against GMO. We'll be discussing that. We participate in a number of projects of that kind. I would like to ask the organizers of the conference to put this topic into the resolution and perhaps send it to the government, to the president, to the parliament, and so on. Thank you. We'll review this suggestion.